What is up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Courtside here on the Basketball Network. I'm your host, Caleb. I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Connor. Connor, how we doing?
Doing good, man. Feeling good after that first episode. Had an absolute blast filming it. Definitely been amazing. So yeah, man, I'm just excited that we're keeping this going.
Yeah, no, I'm excited as well. And honestly, the first episode was such a blast. So excited to keep it going and do this on a weekly basis. So, in today's episode, we'll be covering some recently released news in the NBA, specifically the schedule being released last Thursday, talking about some reactions to the NBA draft and free agency that just happened, and then also discussing some of our expectations in the upcoming season. But real quick before we get started, I really just wanted to say a big thank you to everyone who listened and tuned in to our first podcast last week. It was such a blast to see everybody's comments, and excited to get to do more of that. But if you do have a quick second, please, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to drop a like, subscribe. That would really help. Or if you're listening on any of the podcast platforms, make sure and give us a 5-star rating. We really appreciate it. But to start today's show off, we actually want to introduce a new segment that we're going to be doing called Transition 3. So really what we're going to be doing in this segment is just discussing some of the new news that is happening in the world of basketball, specifically the three biggest stories that are happening, hence the name. So first topic that we want to discuss is Caitlin Clark and her recent performance in the WNBA after the Olympic break. So there's been 2 games for the Indiana Fever since the Olympic break came off, and both of them, the Indiana Fever came out with a win, and Caitlin Clark has been on a heater with wins against the Phoenix Mercury and the Seattle Storm, scoring over 20 points in both games and breaking a record. Connor, how are we feeling about Caitlin Clark's recent performance?
I mean, I think Caitlin Clark is doing what Caitlin Clark does. She goes out there, she helps her team win. And I mean, I don't think the WNBA is any different. After that midseason mark, you start to see those rookies kind of settle into place. Because like obviously Caitlin Clark's a rookie and she's been making some rookie mistakes. But I definitely feel like at least those past 2 games, the game has really been slowing down for her. And she's really seen the floor well.
Yeah. And I think this is the thing that you see about Caitlin Clark that might be the most not as well known. When we think Caitlin Clark, we think, those insane threes, long range. Doesn't matter if you're in her face, like she can shoot from anywhere, but her vision has been on full display this entire season. Was actually looking at some of the Indiana Fever stats, and Caitlin Clark has led the Indiana Fever in assists every single game except one time this year. And
Wow.
you can see with just her vision and her passing, it's really helping her teammates out, as a lot of them are, having season highs and career highs and scoring as well. But I really quickly want to mention the record that she just broke. So last night or 2 nights ago against the Seattle Storm, Caitlin Clark broke the WNBA rookie record for assists in a season. So she broke the record. It was 225, and by the end of the game, she ended up with 232. But one thing I do want to mention is she broke the record, and there's still 12 games left to play in the season. So she not only broke the record, she's going to absolutely obliterate it.
Yeah, no, that's just absolutely insane. Definitely don't think the WNBA has seen a rookie with this good of passing skills like Caitlin Clark has. Obviously, there's some really good facilitators in the WNBA, but I mean, it just seems like Caitlin Clark right now, that level of her game is just a step ahead of just everyone by a milestone.
For sure. Yeah, I think she came into the league and is already maybe the best passer in the league. And the last thing I want to mention on this one is the 2 teams they beat actually were the 5th and 6th seeds in the WNBA, which were right ahead of the Indiana Fever. So we could see them making just a late season march, trying to get a better seed come WNBA playoff time. So the next news story we want to talk about in the Transition 3 was Kansas. So we haven't talked much about college basketball here on the podcast yet, but I know Connor and I both love college basketball and excited to get into it. But Kansas has added another player from the transfer portal, and we're in August. I mean, that's kind of unheard of when you hear of adding guys in the transfer portal this late. But they signed David Diggy Coit Jr. from Northern Illinois which was actually a 20 point per game score, just adding to a loaded roster that they have this upcoming season.
Yeah, no, like you said, it's definitely unheard of, and just the fact that it's such a high profile scorer, which I know some people are going to be like, oh, he played at Northern Illinois, but it's like oftentimes those scorers transfer to these bigger schools. Like Max Abmas, when he transferred to UT, he was still one of their leading scorers, even though he was coming from that small school at ORU. But still balled out. And this guy definitely still has that potential. But honestly, dude, they've just had a big, like you said, offseason in the transfer portal. Um, it's becoming a staple of college sports just across the board is that transfer portal. And Bill Self, I think he's adjusting. I think he's proven once again just why he's one of the best coaches in college basketball and probably arguably one of the greatest coaches of all time. Um, and especially he's definitely beefed up those guard positions, which they needed really badly this offseason.
100%. And I think you hit it right on the head with Bill Self. Has kind of honestly changed his mindset. We see a lot of coaches in college basketball do this when it comes to the transfer portal. Actually, they only signed, I believe it was 2 freshmen that are actually going to come in and play next season, a 4-star and a 5-star. But then they got 6 transfers, and I'll just list them off really quickly. AJ Storr from Wisconsin, Rylan Griffin from Alabama, Shaquille Moore from Mississippi State, Zeke Mayo from South Dakota State, and then they got Noah Shelby from Rice, who's actually going to be redshirting this season. And then they also return 3 of their 5 starters and then have both of those freshmen that I mentioned earlier. Just an absolutely star-studded cast that Kansas has. And honestly, when I think of Kansas this season, I'm thinking it's a Final Four or bust.
Yeah, I mean, definitely expectations for them are going to be that Final Four run. Um, but I mean, I think that first step is definitely you got to get through the Big 12 play, man. Obviously, I think the Big 12 lost a lot of their big names to the draft this year. But I mean, they're pretty much all those top teams are reloaded and they're ready to go. And it's going to be a grind, for all those top teams. There's no easy game in the Big 12. But if we know anything about Bill Self, he'll have Kansas ready.
100%. And yeah, no, Big 12 definitely a grind. Best basketball conference in the nation, if you ask me. And last thing I want to mention on this one is Kansas was actually the 3rd ranked transfer class. So they got 6 transfers and they were all pretty star-studded, but that was still behind Indiana coming in at 2nd. And then obviously Coach Cal, his first season at Arkansas, getting that number 1 spot when it comes to 24/7's transfer portal rankings. And then the last piece of news, this actually came yesterday or Sunday, I believe, was the news from Adrian Wojnarowski that the star of the France Olympic team, Gershon Yabusele, has agreed on a 1-year, $2.1 million deal with the Philadelphia 76ers. And I'm super excited to see this guy come back to the NBA.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely, obviously, has had a stint overseas, and I think he averaged like 10 points and 4 rebounds for Real Madrid, which for that league, is a pretty solid player, especially in his position. But yeah, the dude came and balled out the 2 weeks that the Olympics were going on.
Yeah, and you hit it right there. Yeah, he had averaged 10 points, 4 rebounds for Real Madrid the past couple of seasons. And what I will mention is he was actually only playing 20 minutes per game. So if you really adjust that for NBA minutes, those numbers can be a lot higher. And this was something that the 76ers were in dire need of. And we'll kind of discuss a little bit more about the 76ers later in the podcast. But they were really needing some backup depth at the 4 position. They signed Caleb Martin this season, but really didn't have any backup. So it was just going to be Caleb Martin there. And so seeing Yabusele get this stint here back in the NBA after being gone for a past couple of seasons is going to be really exciting to see. And I did want to pose a question to you because I think the one reason that Yabusele was so famous after the Olympics was for this picture right here. And if you're not seeing because you're listening to it on a podcast, Yabusele absolutely posterized LeBron James in the Olympics. And so one thing I wanted to ask is, does Yabusele get signed by the 76ers if he doesn't dunk on LeBron in the Olympics?
I mean, it definitely did not hurt his chances. Um, honestly, LeBron's the most famous player right now, and dunking on him, obviously going to draw a ton of headlines. But honestly, I think he still gets signed. I mean, if you watched any game, not just that final USA game, he was playing incredibly well every single game. The entire pool play in the tournament, like he was one of their most important players on France. Um, and so honestly, I think some team gives him a chance, even if that play doesn't happen. But I mean, definitely helped him that he had that highlight play.
Yeah, 100%. And I think one thing I'd mention to go off on that is we see Yabusele actually playing over Rudy Gobert. And I know there were reports that Rudy Gobert for France had an injury during the Olympics, but whether or not he had an injury, Yabusele was going to be in the game and he was going to be playing. And he was a big reason why France made it all the way to the gold medal game. And honestly, kind of took the United States down to the wire until Steph Curry went crazy. So excited to see him on the 76ers and to see what comes up this season. We'll make sure and keep track of that. But really just diving into the rest of the show today. Next, we really want to talk about is the new news of the schedule being released finally for the NBA season. So the NBA released its full schedule back on Thursday, and opening night is on Tuesday, October 22nd, and we go with two big matchups. So the first matchup's between the New York Knicks and the Boston Celtics, and then we got the doubleheader, second half of it being the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Los Angeles Lakers. Connor, what are you excited about these two games?
Man, I mean, obviously, you got LeBron and the Lakers, little older team, but they're still a serviceable team. And then you got the young guns and the Timberwolves led by no other than Anthony Edwards. I think that'll be an exciting matchup. Um, but honestly, man, I'm really excited for this Knicks Celtics game. I really think we could be looking at the top two seeds in the East playing right
Mm-hmm.
now. Obviously, Celtics coming off the finals win, and then Knicks falling just a little short. Um, but yeah, but obviously I think the Knicks are reloaded. They're one of the deeper teams in the league, and so I'm excited for that one in particular.
Yeah, I think that's going to be such a great game and excited that it's going to be highlighted as the first game of the season. Obviously, we'll see the Celtics get their championship rings, but I think this might be the first time that the last year's NBA champions might be coming into the game with more of a chip on their shoulder than the team that didn't win the championship with both Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum may feel a little slighted after Jaylen Brown being left off of Team USA and Jason Tatum not getting any minutes. So really excited to see what goes on there, and I think it'll be a great game. And then obviously in the nightcap, as you mentioned, the young guns of the Minnesota Timberwolves with Anthony Edwards and Carl Anthony Towns going up against LeBron James and Anthony Davis of the Los Angeles Lakers. I think this is a big showing for Anthony Edwards. I really feel like this is the NBA kind of showing the world that, hey, this might be the next face of the NBA because there's a lot of other teams that you could put into this spot against the Los Angeles Lakers on opening night. Obviously, you got Steph Curry out in Golden State being a big star, Kevin Durant and the Suns, but no, they chose Anthony Edwards and the Minnesota Timberwolves to go up and match up against LeBron James to open the season. So really excited to see that game. Think it'd be a good starting point and just ready to get this NBA season kicked off.
Yeah, no, definitely. And obviously, I'm not saying this one game is going to dictate the Timberwolves season, but we watched Anthony Edwards play so well the entire last season, postseason, but then just fizzle out in that conference finals against the Mavs. He just could not get it going, was not shooting well. But I think this is a great chance for him to step up into the light, and just come out here and just absolutely kill it.
Yeah. And then another game we wanted to mention is actually just in that next day, Wednesday, October 23rd. You see that there's the Bucks and the 76ers, but the big one for me is the Phoenix Suns versus the Los Angeles Clippers. And maybe not for the most typical reason, but the Clippers are actually going to be unveiling their new Intuit Dome, so their arena out in LA for the first time. So that's going to be super cool to see as it has a bunch of new features that we've never seen in NBA arenas before. Specifically, this thing called the Wall, which is basically a section of the arena that's going to be behind one of the baskets that's designed to be a section of the stadium that's free of any opposing fans. So only Clippers fans are going to be in that one section. So I can't imagine being Kevin Durant or Devin Booker looking at shooting free throws maybe at the end of the game and facing the wall. So that will be something that's going to be really fun to see. And obviously a new look at the Clippers with Paul George not being there anymore.
Yeah. Honestly, I think the biggest part uh, of the new arena is that the Clippers just finally have their own place. You
Mm,
know, always playing in the shadow of the Lakers. I feel like no matter if the Clippers were better than the Lakers or not, that was the Lakers arena. You know, but now they finally have a place to call their home. That's just theirs. They don't have to share it. But yeah, so excited for that. Hopefully they can get, a win on their first home game on that new floor. But yeah, but Clippers will definitely be interesting without Paul George, though. I mean, it's always hard losing a 23 point per game scorer.
for sure. And yeah, what you mentioned, I think is exactly right. With, going to the Clippers game previously, you'd be going to the Staples Center, or more recently known as the Crypto.com Arena, and walking out front, you see statues of Magic Johnson and Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal and all these Lakers legends. And it's like, do the Clippers even really feel like this is their home arena? And now they finally got it, and obviously it's going to be one of the premium arenas in the NBA. So excited to see them get their season kicked off there. Another big game that we got news on that I know everyone was anticipating, though, was Klay Thompson's return to the Bay against Golden State Warriors. And that one's going to be coming up on November 12th. So they make us wait a little bit for it, not right there at the beginning, which I wish it would have been. But this might be the most anticipated reunion or revenge game he or the NBA has for this season.
Yeah, I feel like, man, this got to be a reunion game. I don't know. If I was the Warriors, I would have no ill will towards Clay. If the fans come out and boo him, I feel like that's a little disservice to everything that Warriors dynasty had. Clay was, their second best player during that dynasty. But sometimes players and teams just drift apart. What they're envisioning for their own future, might just go two separate ways. And I think that's what happened with Clay and the Warriors. Um, but I mean, it seems like him and Steph are still good friends. So I definitely think that'll be a game to keep an eye on. And it'll definitely be fun to watch to finally see them two play on opposite sides of the court.
Yeah, I think he's going to get just an amazing tribute video. Honestly, might make me cry a little bit, and it's going to be tough not seeing Klay Thompson in that Golden State Warrior uniform anymore. But, at least he goes to the Dallas Mavericks, which is a place at least somewhat close to home for me. So, can still watch him play, but definitely a big game that I'll be anticipating. And then the last specific little game that we want to mention is Paul George's reunion against the Clippers. That's going to be coming up on November 6th. And so obviously Paul George joined the 76ers this offseason. And I feel like this kind of dispute between the player and the team might be a little different than the Klay Thompson and the Warriors. There might be a little bad blood because Paul George and the Clippers relationship ended on some rough terms, I would say, as reports came out that Paul George was actually annoyed with the Clippers at the end of his stint because they gave their other star player, Kawhi Leonard, a 3-year, $150 million extension this year. And Paul George was looking for the same thing, but for some reason the Clippers wouldn't do it.
Yeah, I mean, definitely an interesting just whole situation. Um, I think I'm sure the Clippers were just like, which one do we want to be our guy still going forward? Obviously they decided on Kawhi. Um, I don't know. I mean, I can see why Paul George would feel slighted in that regard, just because, someone else got picked over him. But honestly, I feel like Paul George still, has not competed the best in the playoffs. Um, Last season, he played like 74 games, almost 23 points a game, shot the ball really well in the regular season. got to the playoffs and his numbers just dipped all across the board. You know, obviously he's still trying to beat those playoff P allegations, which obviously 19 points a game in the playoffs, isn't horrible, but to his standard, you know, definitely Clippers were expecting more. Um, so yeah, but I definitely might anticipate Clippers fans not being too happy to receive him back.
Yeah, he might be focused a little too much on being podcast P rather than playoff P. But one thing I do want to touch on for this one is we see them give the extension to Kawhi and not Paul George, which they could have gave it to both. They had the space. But the one thing is, I feel like Paul George, although he hasn't been the healthiest, has been a little more healthy than Kawhi. So I'm really interested to see and kind of somewhat, if we could, hear what the decision was and why Paul George wasn't also included.
Yeah, I definitely thought about that because obviously, like, I think outside of this season, the most games Paul George had played was like maybe 55 for the Clippers since he's gotten there. But obviously, this past season, 74. But I mean, Kawhi, isn't really a whole lot more active in terms of games played than Paul George is. So yeah, it's definitely interesting that they decided to go with Kawhi. It's also just really interesting because they're both aging with injury histories. You know.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, do want to touch on one of my favorite days in the NBA. It's going to be Christmas Day and the games that go along with it. So we see 5 different games happening on Christmas Day, obviously starting from 12 p.m. Eastern, going all the way into the night. So best day for action in the NBA. So first up, we see the Spurs versus Knicks. Then we'll see Timberwolves versus Mavs, 76ers versus Celtics, the Lakers versus Warriors, which is the one that I'll be the most excited about, and then the Suns versus the Nuggets. But I do want to mention, is there anybody that you don't see on this list that you're kind of surprised about, Connor?
Man, I don't know. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I'm a little surprised to see the Spurs on there, which I think they're definitely being carried by the Wembanyama name. Um, but I don't know. Who are you thinking that should be on there that's not?
I had 2 that came to mind. So first one was the Thunder. Obviously, they're a young team, not as big of a market, but made it to the Western Conference Finals last year, had an MVP candidate in Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, and just a lot of hype around them last year. I feel like the NBA is just not giving them their flowers, and obviously looking at this list, the Spurs probably would be the only team that I would say they deserve to be in above. But as you mentioned, getting carried by Wembanyama. But another one that I noticed was the Milwaukee Bucks. I mean, I know they haven't been performing as great as, in seasons past, but you still got the duo of Giannis Antetokounmpo and Damian Lillard. Big names not to be listed here for Christmas Day.
Yeah, I mean, definitely Giannis. I would say more than Damian Lillard not being on there. Um, but I didn't even think about the OKC Thunder. I definitely think they should be on here. I would say they're a top 8 to 5 team in the league. Depending on where you want to rank them. But obviously having gone to school in Oklahoma previously, know a lot of OKC fans. And that's just kind of the vibe that OKC as a team and as a city just kind of have is, they are always constantly looked over, and but they never let that get them down. Like we saw this past season, no one expected them to do anything. They ended up being the number 1 or the number 2 or number 1 seed, out in the West. Um, but yeah, no, I mean, I definitely think they got most of those top teams in there with, especially they got pretty much every big name outside of Giannis into on Christmas Day.
Yeah, and I think OKC obviously not the biggest in markets, but they do have some of the best fans, and maybe that might be okay that they're not on Christmas Day. I know a lot of people obviously have plans that day, and sometimes players are excited not to play on it, but that was just one of the names and teams that I was thinking of that were just pretty surprising not to see on this list. But obviously we only have a slate of 5 games, so you can't get every team in there. But just a couple that I thought were a little interesting to not be included. But Another thing that I thought was interesting was kind of looking at the nationally televised games per NBA team this season. So we have a breakdown of in this huge span where teams are getting anywhere between 0 and 5 nationally televised games to all the way up to 31 to 40 nationally televised game. And the teams that are up there and getting the most are teams like the Lakers, the Warriors, the Celtics, and the Knicks, which obviously I feel like are kind of as expected, just being some of the biggest names and fan bases in the NBA. Warriors being up there is a little surprising, but obviously for nationally televised games, Steph Curry is must-watch TV, so the NBA is going to put him out there as much as you can. But this is another place, if you look, the Thunder are down there between 21 and 25, where I feel like they're getting a little disrespected again. Where a team that was one of the top seeds in the West last year are still not even in the top 10 when it comes to nationally televised games for the 2024-2025 season.
Yeah, no, for sure. Man, I can't even remember how many national televised games they had last year. I think it was less than five. Like they were definitely in that 0 to 5 range last year, and I know they definitely used that as fuel to be like, we're going to go out and prove them wrong. And I think this is just an excellent chance for them to do that again. They keep that same mindset. Because I mean, personally, I think definitely they should be in that 26 to 30 range at least.
Yep.
I don't know. Obviously, those top four teams, you're going to see those up there every time. As long as Curry's on the Warriors, they'll be up there. But the Lakers, Boston, Knicks, some of the historic teams of the NBA, they're always going to be up there. But yeah, no, definitely the Timberwolves and the Thunder being at 21 to 25 is a little surprising.
Another one I wanted to mention and get your take on is how about the Miami Heat being down between 11 and 15? Also, Orlando Magic between 6 and 10 nationally televised games. I mean, these were playoff teams last year. I only project that they're going to be going up since last season, and it just seems like they're not going to be out there for the world to see that much.
Yeah, I mean, regards to the Orlando Magic, what were they, like the fifth or fourth seed last year? They
Yeah.
were a decently high seed. I just don't think the NBA views them as must-watch basketball, if that makes sense.
Yep.
They're not going to bring in viewers across the country or across the globe, which I'm not saying that they're a bad team. I mean, they have some solid pieces on the team with Bankero and Franz Wagner. Those are two incredible players. But I think the Heat is a little surprising just because they're a pretty big market, pretty big name, But yeah, I think it's just a thing. They didn't play the best last year. So I'm sure, they got bumped down a little just because of that. And I feel like they didn't really bring anybody in that they saw as, oh, it's moving them into contender spots.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, as you mentioned, the NBA, it's a business. So at the end of the day, they're not making these decisions based on fan bases and what they want. They're making decisions based on, how much money are we going to make when we get these games on national TV.
Yeah.
And then the last, go ahead.
Oh, just as like a fan, fans hate to see that, and it's hard for fans to come from their perspective and understand it, but definitely from that league perspective, it makes the most sense for them.
Yeah, 100%. And then one last big news that we got back on Thursday was the new NBA Cup. So it's no longer called the in-season tournament as it was last year. Now it's sponsored by Emirates, and it's going to be the Emirates NBA Cup. And we got the groups for each conference here for the NBA Cup. And so if you don't know what the NBA Cup is, I'll quickly just give you a brief recap of what it is. So basically, the NBA Cup is an middle of the season tournament for the NBA where these teams are actually competing for a little bit of incentive or money per se. And so basically each team is put into a group of 5. And so there's 3 groups in the West, 3 groups in the East. So 15 teams in each conference. And basically they go through a pool play where each team plays everybody in their group, and the top seed from each group then makes it into the tournament. And then you also have two wild cards, one from the East, one for the West, that make it into the tournament. So it's an 8-team tournament, basically just a knockout rounds after that, with two teams ending up playing in Las Vegas. And then the winning team obviously making some additional money, which all of the players I'm sure love that. But thought it would be interesting if we quickly go through each of the groups and then we pick who we think is going to come out on top from each of the groups. So for the first group in the West A group, we got the Minnesota Timberwolves, Los Angeles Clippers, Sacramento Kings, Houston Rockets, Portland Trailblazers. Connor, who you got?
Man, this is really hard for me to say. Um, but I think I'm going to have to go with the Timberwolves, probably followed pretty closely by the Kings. I know that might be a surprise, but I mean, I like the Kings roster. But yeah, I think the Timberwolves are just from top to bottom probably the best team in that pool.
Yeah, I agree, and I think we saw the Timberwolves' dominance last year. So I would have to go with the Timberwolves as well. Kings were a close second for me. I just don't think they have the bigs. Obviously, they have Sabonis, but outside of that, I don't think they have the bigs to match up with Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert. And then obviously, I don't know who's going to stop Anthony Edwards there. For the West B group, we got the Oklahoma City Thunder, Phoenix Suns, Los Angeles Lakers, Utah Jazz, and San Antonio Spurs.
Man, dude, give me the Thunder. Don't mean to jump on the train, but I mean, dude, they kept their entire team together. Obviously, losing Giddy, you can argue that they lost Gordon Hayward. But they added a key piece. They added Isaiah Hartenstein. They got some size. They got rebounding and some defense. And honestly, I just really don't think there's anyone else in that pool that can compete with them. As good as some of these individual players are on those teams, I just think from the teams as a whole just can't compete with them.
Yeah, Oklahoma City Thunder was up there for me, but I actually gave the nod to the Phoenix Suns. I know they don't have a lot of depth, but give me Kevin Durant, give me Devin Booker. As long as they're healthy, I think the Phoenix Suns are going to take this one. Obviously, I think it's going to be Suns, Thunder 1-2. Lakers probably following up in the third slot. But really, it's between those three teams, but I like the Phoenix Suns' chances in this one. Yeah. All right, and then for the last group for the West, we got the Nuggets, the Mavericks, the Pelicans, the Warriors, and the Grizzlies.
Dude, I might be taking the reigning Western Conference Finals champs, man. I'm gonna go with the Mavs. I just think Luka will thrive in this kind of play. You know, it's just one game. It's not a 7-game series, which I think Luka thrives in those one-game series or that one-game play. So I think the Mavs will do amazing in this tournament.
This was actually the hardest group for me to pick. Obviously, I got the personal ties, and I want to say the Warriors, but just not certain what the Warriors are going to look like after this offseason. I feel like there were a lot of pitfalls and a lot of, hype coming into it, but then just nothing coming back, obviously, with the loss of Klay Thompson. One interesting team that I thought was the Memphis Grizzlies with the addition of Zach Edey and then obviously Ja Morant actually getting to play. That was one that I was pretty interested in taking, but for me, it was kind of down between the Nuggets and the Mavs. And just to be a little different, I'm going to go with the Denver Nuggets here. Just don't know if any of these teams have an answer for Nikola Jokic. And then obviously I like the core with Jamal Murray. Even though he has been playing well recently, I think he's going to pick it up. And then Aaron Gordon and Michael Porter Jr. Just a solid group all around. I feel like it's a pretty safe pick. But give me the Denver Nuggets coming out of that C group for the West. And then for the East, we got the New York Knicks, the Orlando Magic, Philadelphia 76ers, Brooklyn Nets, and the Charlotte Hornets.
Oh, man, I think this is going to be a close game between the Knicks and probably the 76ers. I know we were talking about the Magic earlier, but I just don't think they have the big men to compete with the 76ers right now. But I think I'm going to have to give the edge to the Knicks just because I think they're just the more complete team. Even with the addition of Paul George for the 76ers, I just like the Knicks as a roster better.
Yeah, that 100% agree. I was going with the New York Knicks as well, but or I mean the Villanova Knicks, should I say? With the addition of McCall Bridges, excited to see that team play all together. But honestly, it's just kind of the youth versus the the a little bit of an older team in the 76ers now with the addition of Paul George. But I just feel like the Knicks are deep and they're just going to be able to keep running and honestly, they're one of my sleeper teams to actually take it out of the East this year. So I would go with lean the Knicks as well. All right, for the East B division, we got the Bucks, the Pacers, the Heat, the Raptors, and the Pistons.
Man, see, for me, I think this was the hardest one.
Really?
Yeah, dude, I think those top three teams right there, I think are all pretty close in terms of talent. Because you have the consistent overachievers in the Heat, but then I don't know. I kind of like how the Pacers are built. I think we saw how good they played last year. But I will say this: if the Bucks are healthy, I'm gonna give it to the Bucks. I think a healthy Damian Lillard, a healthy Giannis, healthy Chris Middleton, those three guys, if they're healthy, I think they'll play well and they can win that group.
Yeah, I have to lean the Bucks as well for this one. I was thinking about the Pacers, but the Pacers might score 140 on you, but you might score 145 on them. So just got to give it up to Giannis and Dame just coming up in the clutch and actually able to get some stops and then score when they need. So I think the Bucks make it out of the B division in the East as well. And then the last one, which might be the easiest one to pick, the Boston Celtics, the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Chicago Bulls, the Atlanta Hawks, and the Washington Wizards.
Yeah. I mean, I'm gonna give it to the Celtics, but this might come as a surprise. But I feel like the Hawks might make a run at them. I think they'll play better without DeJounte Murray there. But I mean, I think the Celtics are just light years ahead of all four of these teams.
Yep, Boston Celtics, not even a question. Honestly, don't know why the NBA made it so easy for them. I could see this one being 5-0, not even close, getting the top seed in the NBA Cup and being set up to win it all. So, honestly, this group right here doesn't make sense to me. I wish it was mixed up a little bit because I feel like a lot of the bottom feeder teams in the East are in the C division, but sometimes the champs have the easiest road, and it looks like that's what they got here today. All right,
Pays to be a
well,
winner.
hey, it always does, right? Well, jumping back into maybe looking at a little bit of our draft reaction and free agency reactions. Wanted just to see, Connor, if you had any thoughts on draft night specifically, if there were any winners from the NBA draft or any surprises that you had.
Wow. I mean, winners. I know. I think you really like him, but Rod Dillingham from Kentucky going to the Timberwolves.
Yep,
I really like him. I mean, a point guard shooting 44%, and especially I'm pretty sure a decent amount of them weren't catch and shoot, if I'm remembering correctly.
that's correct.
I think he's a good scorer. I think he's a great replacement for Mike Conley eventually. Kind of a passing of the torch. Mike Conley can maybe help him, become more of a um, administrator for the offense. A surprise, Donovan Clingan falling to the seventh pick is by far my biggest surprise. He was someone that was talked about potentially being the number one pick at one point, and it seemed like up until the draft he was supposed to be a top four pick, you know, and then all of a sudden the Trailblazers see him there at the seventh pick, but he's a 7-footer, averaged 13 points, 7.5 rebounds in 22 minutes. I think if you adjust his play, he gets a few more minutes. I think he plays solid defense. He's a great scorer and rebounder. I see him as a surprise and also a steal for them at 7.
Yeah, and very efficient, as you mentioned. Obviously the Blazers were sitting there at the seventh pick, and Donovan Clingan has fallen to you, and it's kind of like you gotta take him. I mean, they already had two starting caliber centers on their roster with DeAndre Ayton and Robert Williams, but if Klingan's listed like sitting there at 7, you don't think, you just pick and you figure out your team later on. So that was a big surprise for me as well. And then also Rob Dillingham. We see some executives call him lightning in a bottle because he can just get hot and get going so fast. And one of his weaknesses that a lot of people were kind of surprised to see him get picked at 8 was because of his defense. But I feel like the Timberwolves are just such a good fit because on the Timberwolves, it's okay if your guards don't have the best defense because you have the defensive player of the year, Rudy Gobert, and back there. So if you get beat off the dribble once or twice, it's not the worst thing because the defensive player of the year is sitting there maybe able to help block a shot. And then I think you mentioned it exactly right with the passing of the torch from Mike Conley to Rob Dillingham. And I just really excited to see a Rob Dillingham, Anthony Edwards backcourt. I think it's going to be electric and super fun to watch. A lot of highlight plays. Another one of my winners, and I was really sad to see it because I'm not a huge fan of this team, but the Los Angeles Lakers getting Dalton Connect all the way down at 17. I thought this guy might go in the top 10, and he just kept falling and falling and falling. And I know a lot of people said it was because of his age and maybe he doesn't have the best defensive ability, but he's a capable defender. I mean, he played at Tennessee, which is known for their defense. But this guy averaged 28 points per 40 minutes at Tennessee, one of, if not the best scorers in the draft, shot 40% from three, and I think he's the most NBA ready player on the offensive side of things in this year's draft. And to get him at 17 and to be able to learn and listen in a system under LeBron, I think he's going to flourish. Honestly, I feel like it's kind of another Austin Reeves thing where it's just going to be the perfect fit and he's going to be able to help the Los Angeles Lakers a lot. And then another surprise I had was Zach Edey going number 9 to the Memphis Grizzlies. Draft night was not expecting that, was very surprised and was unsure, but the more I think about it, Zach Edey setting screens for Ja Morant. I mean, you can't get around a Zach Edey screen, and he showed that in the Summer League. I think this might have been one of the best picks of the draft, even though it was a big surprise, because I think Zach Edey's actually going to be able to translate his game. One of the best college basketball players we've ever seen. But I think he's going to be able to translate his game and be a big help to the Memphis Grizzlies this year.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like you said, it was a surprise, but he's not going to be asked to be the go-to scorer, down low like he was in college. So he's definitely going to get a lot of open looks. He'll get a lot of layups and dunks off of Ja Morant, slashing. And obviously the Grizzlies have a couple of shooters on their team. But yeah, I think, though, he's a little slower than the Grizzlies like to play, I would say. Obviously, with Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr., they like to run, in transition, where Zach Edey is not the fastest player. So I'm interested to see where they'll put him in the lineup. If he'll be a starter or if he'll come off the bench, when they need him. And I'm also interested to see just how many minutes he'll play at a time. Because you saw at Purdue, the coach would take him out because he would get tired. So I'm a little interested just to see how he'll fit in, like, conditioning wise.
Yeah, I think the conditioning is the big thing. But again, I think we saw it in the Summer League. This guy's got a motor. I mean, he's huge, right? Like, he's absolutely ginormous. Obviously, above 7 feet, weighs a ton compared to a lot of other NBA players, but he can move a little bit. And I think you got to realize that, he's going to be able to do a lot of things on the offensive end, but also on the defensive end, just sitting there and being able to help on drives and different things like that. The biggest worry, obviously, is whenever they call a pick and roll and he gets switched out on a guard. Is he able to move his feet enough to force a pass rather than letting him blow by? So we'll see that. But again, showed a lot of flashes in the Summer League, which made me really excited for this guy and just really excited to see what he does for the Grizzlies this season. Not only did we have the draft that happened, but we had a lot of things happen in free agency, which I wanted to talk with you today about. And specifically, the first one is, we mentioned it earlier, but Paul George signing with the 76ers. What do you think this means for the 76ers? Are they finally in that championship caliber team? Or do we think this signing actually doesn't mean as much as it might seem?
I'm not gonna lie, I don't see them as a championship caliber team. I think they have three really good starters. You have Tyrese Maxey. Obviously, you got Paul George. You got Joel Embiid, obviously. But outside of them, though, they're not a really deep team, I would say. They rely heavily on, well, before they relied heavily on the first, on Maxey and Embiid. And obviously, you're going to bring in Paul George now. But, those Paul George and Joel Embiid, they're getting a little old. Embiid's, on the wrong side of 30 now. Paul George is 34. And they're both having injury problems, the past few years. So can they stay healthy? If they can stay healthy, I think they'll be a pretty good team. But ultimately, I just think they fall short of a few of the other rosters in the East.
Yeah, I think they have a shot, but I do think that they are one of the older teams. Obviously, Tyrese Maxey is kind of where the young blood comes in, and they do have Ricky Council, which is going to be an exciting player to watch. But I don't know if he plays many minutes this season. And then they had some good pickups this season that I will mention. Some of which being Eric Gordon, Reggie Jackson, Caleb Martin, as I mentioned earlier, Andre Drummond, and then drafting Jared McCain. So some good pickups. Do think they have a little bit of depth, but compared to some of the other rosters, not sure that the Paul George signing is what puts them over the hump and allows them to actually compete for that championship. I kind of expect maybe a second round exit. Another team we wanted to talk about, I know this is your team, so I'm going to let you take it away, is the Houston Rockets. How are we feeling about them this year?
Man, I'm not going to lie. It is so exciting to be a Rockets fan right now, but it's also a little frustrating. And I'll explain that. Obviously, exciting. We have 7 or 8 guys under the age of 24 right now on the roster who can all contribute at a high level. Um, but I think there's a frustrating part. We have Fred Van Fleet and Dylan Brooks on the roster, who obviously Fred Van Fleet I think is a phenomenal point guard. He's a great distributor and a good veteran presence for a lot of our young guards. And then you have Dylan Brooks who will set the tone on defense. He can hit some spot up threes when he needs to, and brings kind of like a toughness to those, because a lot of these young teams that's kind of what they lack, is they lack the toughness to win sometimes. And I think you can argue that Dylan Brooks can bring that to them. But the thing is, those two guys are eating into a lot of minutes for some of our young players. I'm not gonna lie, I'm really hoping Amen Thompson gets the keys to play point guard this year. They were kind of using him as like a small forward, power forward at like the short corner
Yeah.
last year, which ended up working out. But I mean, you got to get the ball in his hands, let him go. Um, but yeah, I just think it's going to be a balance of trying to, bring in these young guys while also, not just completely disrespecting the aging players, who have been brought in to be like a mentorship kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. And one thing I hope is obviously Fred Van Fleet's going to be the starting point guard, but I really want to see Reed Shepard play some minutes. I think he is going to be a very exciting player to watch. Third pick in the NBA draft this season. I feel like a lot of people had them at one, but a lot of people obviously were unsure about him as well, just with his size and stature. But he balled out in the summer league, so another exciting piece that the Rockets added in the draft this season. But as you mentioned, I mean, this team is so young. At this point, they kind of look like a college team, just with college teams getting older because of the transfer portal, and the Houston Rockets just acquiring assets that are really young in age. Obviously, this season's not going to be a season where they're competing for a championship, but I do think this is a season where they can make some noise, maybe trying to sneak into that play-in, and maybe make it off into the playoffs.
I definitely think the plan is where they should be. Um, like obviously, like you said, they're not going to be playing for a championship. But they were competing for a play-in up until like the last 5 games of the season last year. They just kind of lost steam at the end with the team so young. But I think there's high expectations. We have a great coach. You know, he's a phenomenal player management. And he's done a good job like obviously at the Celtics. I think he was a good coach. Obviously, there's off the court issues that went on. Um, but yeah, no, I think it should be an exciting season. I think Rockets fans have a lot to look out for, especially Cam Whitmore, Jabari Smith, Shingun should be back from injury. Um, but yeah, definitely excited for this season.
Yeah. And I think that's a little more than I can say myself for my team, unfortunately. So, Golden State Warriors had a kind of a quiet offseason, kind of busy. I mean, we made some moves, but nothing that obviously moved the needle, but a lot that just made Warriors fans sad. Understandably, with Klay Thompson leaving, that was just bittersweet. I think we all knew it was time to move on from that. Klay wanted a lot of money and maybe wasn't playing like it, but obviously deserves a lot just because of what he's done for Golden State. So excited that he gets a fresh start with the Mavs, which, by the way, we'll talk about a little later, but I think it's a perfect fit for him. And then waiving Chris Paul, I could have told you before it started that that experiment was not going to work. It's just not the type of player that Steph needs to be
Nope.
around. I mean, and Chris Paul didn't want to work with the second unit. I mean, Chris Paul still has some good years left in him, so he wants to start. So maybe not the best there, but did bring in some ads that might help our team a little bit. So Kyle Anderson coming over in a sign and trade from Minnesota. Also got Buddy Hield, which I am very excited about Buddy Hield because of his 3-point shooting. I mean, in the past 5 seasons, Steph Curry and Buddy Hield are 1 and 2 in the most threes made in the NBA. And so just having them side by side, I think it could be not exactly how it was with Klay Thompson, because I'm never going to put Buddy Hield anywhere in the same comparison as Klay Thompson. But I do think it could be fun where we have some crazy shooting games, which would be really fun to see. And then we also picked up DeAnthony Melton. That was a good signing as well, just giving us more guard depth to help Steph Curry out there. But just looking over the depth chart, just nothing that gets you really excited, unfortunately. Still have Andrew Wiggins, which, has shown flashes back in 2022 in the playoffs, played really well, but then has also shown flashes where you kind of forget he's out there. Jonathan Kuminga is one bright spot that I'm really hoping will just continue to develop. We've seen it time and time again. So excited to see what he looks like this year. And then obviously the one person I'm really excited to see besides Steph Curry, Brandon Pajinski. He had a great rookie season. Feel like it's going to be even better sophomore year. And one thing I'll mention is there were a lot of trade rumors going around with Golden State, specifically with Lowry Markkanen from the Jazz, who just signed an extension, so that's no longer going to happen. But the one thing that Golden State said was Brandon Pajinski was not for sale. He wasn't leaving. They're committed to Brandon Pajinski, and after that rookie season he had, I completely understand why. So I think we got some bright spots, but unfortunately, unless we make some moves during the season and near the trade deadline, I feel like we're looking just kind of right back there at the play-in tournament where we've been for a lot of the past 5 years, which is really upsetting as a Warriors fan. Obviously, got to appreciate the great years that we had, but just hoping that something happens to where we don't waste away Steph's last couple of seasons that we have.
Yeah, and kind of with that, I know you mentioned a lot of players, and what you're excited for them. I'm really curious, what are your expectations slash what do you want to see from Draymond?
Draymond Green, I have a love-hate relationship with Draymond Green. I love Draymond Green because such a great player. One of those guys where you hate to play against him, but you love when he's on your team. When I say the hate part of the love-hate relationship, I just hate some of his antics sometimes. So that's hard, and you kind of have to learn to live with it. I think expectations for Draymond Green this season, I really just want him to continue to evolve as a leader. I mean, he's always been a leader on the court, but I want to see it off the court with the development of the young guys. I mean, he's kind of been a detriment to some people, specifically Jordan Poole, which is why we had to get rid of him. Obviously, there were friction there. I'm not saying that was all on Draymond, but I just want him to continue to help these guys grow and further their careers. I mean, guys like Jonathan Kuminga and then even vets that are coming in like Kyle Anderson, just kind of helping them learn from him. that whenever he's not in the game, they're able to help because we know Draymond's going to get thrown out of a few games this season. So just hoping that they're going to be able to, he's going to be able to prepare them for whenever he's not able to play or if there's any injuries like that. Also, I want Draymond to get back to what Draymond did back in 2015. Before we had Kevin Durant, I mean, back when it was just, right after the We Believe Warriors, but first championship season, when Draymond Green was, he was doing his facilitating, but he was also spot up shooting. I mean, if he got that ball back at the top of the key, he was knocking those down. I feel like we saw that go up a little bit last year. I want to continue to see that because when Golden State is at their best is when Draymond Green is hitting open threes. If Draymond Green can hit open threes, Golden State is one of the hardest teams to guard because you just can't account for it. You can't send two off of Steph when he sets the screen. I mean, if Draymond Green can hit open threes, I actually think Golden State can make a run at it. So we'll see what that looks like for this upcoming season.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's the biggest. It's just interesting because typically you see players' 3-point percentages climb as they get older. His have almost declined as he's gotten older. It seems like he hasn't really made that. But to be fair, when they had Kevin Durant, he
Didn't
didn't
have to
need
shoot.
to. Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, no, definitely. I think the Warriors, Draymond can have a big influence on how they perform this season.
Yeah, Draymond will win you some games, but Draymond will also lose you some games. So you grow to love it, but at the same time, just hoping that he can continue to evolve his game and as you mentioned, shoot well and not let it decline anymore. But again, last season was a little bit of a bright spot in the shooting. We saw some games where he hit 3, 4 threes. So just hoping that continues to happen to where if he's open, you got to respect it. Another team I wanted to touch on, one of our favorites just because both going to school in Oklahoma, is the Oklahoma City Thunder. Had some big moves this offseason. Isaiah Hartenstein, a huge signing from the New York Knicks, a big get for them, and then also kept a lot of their core team together. Only real loss was Josh Giddey, but I feel like that kind of needed to happen in order to make room for some of these other guys to get the ball in their hands more. And then obviously replace Josh Giddey with Alex Caruso, which is going to be a great player off the bench for them. And then one other thing I'll mention, Gordon Hayward played limited minutes, but retirement, so he's no longer with the team either. But I think there's a really bright outlook in Oklahoma City. Excited to see what your thoughts are for them.
Oh, yeah. Obviously, the guys loved Josh Giddey. He was one of, he was on their team and he was part of that brotherhood. He just did not fit with how they built their team. They were kind of trying to slide him in at shooting guard, small forward. But obviously Shea's your ball handler on that team, and Josh Giddey's just not a good enough 3-point shooter to play off ball. So yeah, he just did not fit well. And I think like we saw in the playoffs, they played better when he was, not on the floor just because they could space the floor so much more. But honestly, the biggest thing I think for the OKC Thunder is Isaiah Hartenstein. I mean, they were lacking size, and it showed
Yep.
in the playoffs, especially against the Mavs. And so he's someone, he's a 7-footer. He can rebound. He plays defense. He doesn't need the ball to score. I think he only averaged like 7.5 points on the Knicks, but he made such a big impact in the other two areas on the court. But yeah, and so I'm really expecting big things just since they kept almost their entire team. Yeah, and I know Gordon Hayward left as well, but he never really played a whole lot. He might play 4 minutes here or there, but he was never a big contributor. So yeah, I think the Thunder are in a really good place for this season.
Yeah, and with Isaiah Hartenstein, is your expectation? I feel like this is mine. Is where you slide Isaiah Hartenstein as the starting center and then move Chet Holmgren down to the 4, or do you think Hartenstein's going to be more so coming off the bench and we're going to see a little bit of a smaller lineup, kind of like we did last season?
So I think we'll see both. I think Mark Daigneault can use him in either lineup. If they're playing someone like the Timberwolves, slide him in, at center, move Chet to power forward. But or if you're just playing someone who's a little more quicker, you can move Hartenstein to the bench. Bring him in to relieve Chet. But slide Chet back down to center. And you can have your perimeter a lineup that you need. I think that's honestly was a really cool thing when they got him. Is I do think they have that ability, and I hope that's how they use him this season.
Yeah, no, for sure. I agree. And I think the Timberwolves is kind of the perfect, outlet to see when there's two bigs, they got that ability. But obviously, when there's not, Chet can still play the center. He played it well last season. I can only see him going up from there. Another team I wanted to talk about was Dallas Mavericks. Had a big move with the Klay Thompson signing, which I'm just going to real quick go on and say the absolute perfect fit for Klay Thompson, but I also think absolute perfect for a type of player you want alongside Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. Just put Klay Thompson in the corner. All he has to do is run corner and then play some defense. I mean, this dude is a catch and shoot marksman, one of the best 3-point shooters in our generation, probably of all time as well. And you're putting him alongside two of the best ball handlers, guys that can get to the rim, get to their spots, and two guys that force a lot of double teams. To where Klay Thompson, I think, is going to have a lot of open shots. I'm expecting a big season for Klay Thompson and a big season from the Dallas Mavericks.
Yeah, I that's definitely the expectations that they have. Um, Obviously, I think you're losing a couple of their key role players like Derek Jones. Um, especially in that playoff run, I mean, the last like the conference semis and then the conference finals, he was averaging like 15 points a game, you know,
Yep.
and he was shooting it well. And then we obviously know he's a high flyer and he's pretty good at defense. But yeah, I just think what's important is that Klay Thompson finds his confidence back. He finds his shooting stroke. Obviously, I think when he came back last year, he definitely struggled, carried the rest of the season. But yeah, I think, even if he can shoot just a little bit better, I think the Mavs are in such a good position. Because here's the thing, even if Klay Thompson's not shooting what he did back in 2016, you can't leave him. Like he's Klay Thompson, like you have to guard him. And I definitely think that's going to open things up for both Luka and Kyrie.
Yeah, and what I will think is, although there were some big losses in terms of Josh Green, Tim Hardaway Jr., Derek Jones Jr., I feel like those were the big guys that were actually contributing for the Dallas Mavericks. They did add a lot of people, and we saw the commitment to adding people that can shoot, but also fill those roles on the defensive end. So people like Quentin Grimes, who was at Detroit last season, great shooter in college and has shown flashes in the NBA. Najee Marshall, I actually think that's a very big and underrated signing to replace Derek Jones Jr. Maybe not as athletic as Derek Jones Jr., but a four that can run and shoot the three. Shot at a really great clip last year, expecting the same this year. And then Spencer Dinwiddie, the reunion coming back to Dallas Mavericks. Obviously, the primary ball handlers on this team are going to be Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving. But what happens if both of those guys are off the floor? Now you got another guy in Spencer Dinwiddie who has played a lot of minutes in the NBA and has been a great player back when he was with the Brooklyn Nets and even sometime when he was with the Mavericks in the last stint. I just think they kind of supplemented a lot of those losses with some very crucial pieces to where I'm expecting this team, honestly, to get back to the Western Conference Finals, maybe back to the to the NBA Finals. I could see it happen again, just super high, and obviously I think Luka Doncic is going to have an MVP candidate worthy season. So a lot of bright spots for the Dallas Mavericks, maybe trying to do what they couldn't get done last season.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of like how we talked about with Kansas and the Big 12 gauntlet that they have to play. I think the Mavs kind of have a similar thing in the Western Conference. You know, I mean, you have six teams, that are competing for arguably, the top two spots. Um, the Western Conference is definitely, like last year, loaded with really good teams. Um, Obviously, I think the Mavs caught fire at just the right moment last year. But I think they made some roster improvements, and I think they're going to have to play just as well as they did last year if they want to even come close to the conference finals again.
100%. And then I know the last team, we've mentioned them a lot and a lot of names that maybe have been leaving or have come into this team, but wanted to touch on the New York Knicks with the exciting new signing of Mikal Bridges coming to the New York Knicks, finally completing the Villanova Knicks in one team. That is such a cool story that we're not going to get into, but just seeing four guys from the same team in college that won a national championship, now all on the New York Knicks. Honestly, they're like brothers. You can see it on social media, just always been excited for each other, but now they all get to play on the same team again. But there were some other moves that they made as well that I thought would be interesting to talk about. So really wanted to see kind of what your thoughts are for the New York Knicks and kind of the expectation for the season to come.
Yeah. I mean, I think probably the biggest thing for me is they're losing Isaiah Hartenstein. I know we talked about him on the Thunders or on the Thunder, him moving there. It was really nice last year. You know, you had Hartenstein and Mitchell Robinson. They would just sub out for each other. They pretty much, would do the exact same things, and they did them both really well. But now that they're losing him, Mitchell Robinson's probably gonna have to carry a little bit more. But I really like the Mikal Bridges move. I've honestly been a fan of his since he's been drafted. And I think he finally got to show what he can do on the Nets last year. He was their number one option. I think when he got traded there, he averaged pretty close to like 24 to 25 points a game after he got traded. And we all know what he can do on defense from what he did at the Suns. But yeah, I'm definitely expecting a lot from them. I know we talked about they're one of the deepest teams. Definitely high expectations for them in New York.
Yeah, just kind of touching on them being one of the deepest teams. I mean, listen to this. Jalen Brunson, Dante DiVincenzo, Mikal Bridges, Julius Randle, Mitchell Robinson, Josh Hart, OG Anunoby, Precious Achua, Jericho Sims, Miles McBride, Cam Payne. I mean, they're like 10 or 11 deep. And even when it comes to playoff time and that shrinks a little bit, I mean, you go, 8 deep in the playoff normally? I mean, those are some of the 8 great players to have on your roster. I just think this is a team that's going to be able to make a lot of noise this season. There's a lot of high expectations, but I'm excited to see this one get going. I think they're going to be a great team and actually really rival the Boston Celtics this upcoming year.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think it's going to help because you see the Knicks were a little injured last year when they were playing the Pacers. But if you're getting a team that's this deep, it definitely helps with that if they're going to have injury problems again in the playoffs.
Yeah, for sure. Well, real quick, wanted to touch on ESPN's article for the NBA Power Rankings. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I wanted to get your take on the top 10, see what your thoughts are, maybe if you would move some people around. But what they got is they got Boston Celtics at number 1, Oklahoma City Thunder at number 2, Minnesota Timberwolves at number 3, New York Knicks at number 4, Dallas Mavericks at number 5, 76ers at 6, Nuggets at 7, Bucks at 8, Pacers at 9, Cavs at 10. Are there any of those that stick out to you or might be kind of surprised to see them so high?
I mean, Celtics obviously don't surprise, reigning champions. I am just a little surprised to see the 76ers at number 6. Not that I don't think that they're a potential top 10 team, but just to have them ranked above the Nuggets, I feel like, and then also having the Pacers and the Cavs farther down. I think you can make a case that those two teams should be above the 76ers, especially in the Eastern Conference. But I will say I was a little surprised that they didn't put the Phoenix Suns in the top 10. Just because they have those big names. Hopefully, all, 4 stars that they have on their team are going to be healthy. So I was a little surprised that they're not in the top 10.
Yeah, and I feel like for the Phoenix Suns, they didn't have a lot of notable additions, but didn't have many departures either, or at least anybody that played a huge role. I would say Eric Gordon was probably the biggest, and even then, compared to what they got with Durant, Booker, and Beal, hoping, obviously barring any injuries, wasn't a huge deal. They got Ryan Dunn in the draft, which I quickly want to mention. Not sure if he's going to get a whole lot of playing time, but if he does, I think he's the perfect fit for the Phoenix Suns because Ryan Dunn, if you don't know, he really doesn't play any offense, but coming into the NBA, he might already be one of the best defenders in the league. I mean, this guy
Mm-hmm.
is crazy on the defensive side of things. Huge wingspan, played at Virginia, known for defense, basically why he got drafted. And when you're playing alongside of Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, you don't need a lot of offense in your game. You just need to be able to play some defense. So I was pretty surprised by the Suns being that low as well. And then also, I feel like everybody's kind of knocking down on the Nuggets, and I understand
Mm-hmm.
they had some big departures with KCP leaving and also Reggie Jackson, but we cannot sleep on Nikola Jokic. I mean, I think Nikola Jokic is one of the guys that there's just, you don't have an answer. I don't know of any team that has an answer for Nikola Jokic, and so he's going to get his every season or every game. So seeing them down at 7 below a team like the 76ers, I was really surprised about. And then also another one was the Minnesota Timberwolves being as high as 3. I'm high on the Minnesota Timberwolves, but a top 3 in the power ranking is kind of crazy to me, especially because most of their additions were just in the draft.
Yeah. No, I definitely think I would switch at least them and the Knicks. You know, the only thing I could see them having a problem with the Knicks is them just having some new faces, and wondering how they're all going to fit together well. Whereas the Timberwolves, pretty much kept a good chunk of their team together. I know they lost, like Kyle Anderson and McLaughlin. Um, but yeah, I was also a little surprised that they were at 3 as well.
Yeah. And then a little further down, just want to call them out because they are our team. So Golden State Warriors come in at 16, one above the Los Angeles Lakers at 17, though. So we'll make sure and call that out, which, I think Steph is the GOAT over LeBron. So happy to see that one in the power rankings. And then the Houston Rockets coming in at 20. Looking at the teams above them for the Rockets, and I want to hear your take as well. Makes sense why they're listed at 20, I would say. Definitely no one below that they have that I think should be above. But did you think the Rockets should have been a little higher, or do you feel like they're pretty well suited where they are?
I mean, you can make a case that they should be at least at 17 to me, but I mean, they're a young team, that has yet to make the playoffs together. Obviously, Reed Shepherd, AJ Griffin, both coming in, and Aaron Holiday too. Um, and we lost like no one from the roster, that contributed like at all. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's kind of where I expected them to be, just because they were kind of a play-in team almost, but definitely some high expectations for them this season.
Yeah, for sure. Well, any final thoughts you have on the NBA power rankings that ESPN came out with?
No, I think I'm excited. I'm excited to see kind of how they shift throughout the season. I definitely think, a few of the teams are definitely towards the top, are definitely top heavy, star-studded. And obviously, you got some teams like the Dallas Mavericks who might not, be that number one team, but I think, they can make a good run. So yeah, but I'm definitely excited to watch these teams play each other in a couple months.
For sure. Yeah, excited. And we'll make sure and do another kind of go over of the power rankings maybe right before the season starts here in the next month or so. But before we end today's show, we did want to do just a quick thing that we've been kind of talking about and maybe having some games on the show today. So we're actually going to be do a 1v1 draft of rookies in the NBA this season. So we're basically going to be building out a starting 5 and then going through and picking our team to going back and forth and see who puts together the best team. And then maybe you guys can drop it in the comments what team you have. So Connor, you have the first pick.
First pick. All right. Dude, we've talked about him, I know, once or twice throughout this show already, but I'm taking Donovan Clingan, man. I just think you can't pass up a 7-footer who plays defense like that.
Okay, first pick of the rookie draft, we got Donovan Clingan. I think I talked about him a little bit earlier, but give me Reed Shepherd. I mean, absolute stud out of Kentucky. Got to get the little guy out here that can shoot and balled out at the summer league, I might say. I'll take Reed Shepherd in my point guard spot.
All right. Well, that was my second pick. But, I'm probably going to have to take your guy. I'm taking Rob Dillingham.
Man, I was really wanting Rob Dillingham to pair with Reed Shepherd, make it a Kentucky 2.0. But, if you're taking Rob Dillingham, I feel like I got to get someone that's going to size up with Donovan Clingan. So go ahead and give me Zach Edey at the center spot. Nobody's driving on my team.
No one's driving. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to finish out my guard spots. I'm taking Stephen Castle. I mean, he's the number 4 pick for a reason. Excited to watch him and Chris Paul work together and him play with Wembanyama in the coming years. So I'm taking him.
Yeah, I think Stephon Castle was definitely going to be my next pick. Great defender from the guard side of things, but I'm actually going to go a little bigger. Got a smaller guard in Reed Shepherd, so give me Matas Buzelis of the G League Ignite now with the Chicago Bulls. Think this guy can do a little bit of everything, kind of stat sheet stuffer, and showed some flashes in the summer league. So I'll take Matas Buzelis on my team.
Okay. He's one who I feel like at the beginning of last year was supposed to be a top 5 pick, and he definitely slipped a little. But I feel like he was up there at the draft for a reason. I'm taking Zachary from France, man. I mean, number 1 pick, obviously the Hawks see something in him. I'm going to take him with my 4th pick.
Yeah, the 1 and 2 picks were kind of hard for me to touch after their performance in the summer league. Wasn't like really bad, but just not the star power that we see out of the 1 or 2. But for me, I'm gonna probably have to take Alex Sarr in that power forward position, putting him and Zach Edey next to each other. Not sure how anybody's gonna be able to score on my team, but give me Alex Sarr for the power forward.
All right, man. It's kind of getting down, dude. There's so many. The problem is, dude, there's so many players, but I might be taking Ron Holland, kind of go with that, little bit smaller lineup than probably people are used to with. I think I got 2 point guards on there, but you know what? We're going to roll with it. I really like Ron Holland. I know he didn't exceed people's expectations in the G League, but he played well. If y'all ever watched him play, so I'm taking him.
All right, now down to my final pick. Give me the TikTok star and the no, not Bronny James. But give me the TikTok star, the dancer, the famous guy. Give me the paint and nails and all, Jared McCain, to round out my guards. I got to say, I like my team a lot. Think it would be a close matchup, but let us know in the comments who you got. So for myself, it was Reed Shepherd, Jared McCain, Matas Buzelis, Alex Sarr, and Zach Edey.
Yeah, and then for me, I got Zachary Reese-Shea. We got Stephon Castle. We got Ron Holland, Donovan Clingan, and then we got Rob Dillingham.
I think it would be a tough matchup. We'll have to see who in the comments says would win.
Yeah,
but I think that's all we got.
All in there.
Yeah, for sure. But I think that's all we got for today. Connor, you got anything else you want to mention before we let everybody go?
No, I think that's it, man. I think this definitely kind of got me hyped for the NBA season and the college season. Man, I love football season, but to me, nothing beats the basketball season. So I'm definitely getting hyped.
100%. Yeah, excited to be covering it with you this season. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in to the Courtside podcast here on the Basketball Network. As we mentioned earlier, please make sure to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're listening on any other podcast platform, please give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed what you heard. And make sure to drop a comment. Let us know what you want to listen to and hear next. We're always happy to take comments from everybody and discuss on the next podcast. But we'll make sure and we'll see y'all in the next one on Courtside. Peace.
Peace.